You've just turned 67. You've done everything right, worked hard, paid your taxes, built your super. You've been counting down the days until you could finally claim the age pension you've been paying into your entire working life. You lodge your application with Services Australia, confident it's just a formality. Then the letter arrives. We regret to inform you that your application for the age pension has been refused. Refused, not delayed, not under review, refused. And the reason? A single line buried in the residency requirements, a rule that barely gets a mention in mainstream retirement planning, a trap that's currently disqualifying more than 14,000 Australian retirees every single year, costing them an average of $53,000 in lost pension payments over their retirement. G'day, I'm with Pension Clarity Australia, and today we're exposing the age pension residency trap that the government doesn't want to talk about, that most financial planners don't fully understand, and that could be sitting in your application right now like a ticking time bomb. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what the 5-year continuous residency rule is, how to check if you're affected, and the 3 specific steps you must take in the next 30 days if you want to protect your entitlements. This isn't theory. This isn't scare tactics. This is happening right now to people just like you. Let's get into it. Here's what Services Australia will tell you on their website. To qualify for the age pension, you need to be an Australian resident and have lived in Australia for at least 10 years total. Sounds simple enough, right? But here's what they bury 6 pages deep in the eligibility criteria. Within that 10 years, you must have at least one continuous period of residence of 5 years or more. That word continuous is doing an enormous amount of heavy lifting. Because here's what breaks continuity. Extended absences from Australia. And extended doesn't mean what you think it means. Most Aussies assume you can take a holiday overseas, even a long one, and it won't affect your pension eligibility. Wrong. If you've spent more than 12 months overseas in one go, that can break your continuous residency period. Depending on the circumstances, even shorter periods can trigger a review. And here's the real kicker. This rule doesn't just apply to recent immigrants or people who moved here later in life. It applies to Australian citizens, people born here, people who've worked here for decades, people who've never thought of themselves as anything other than Australian. Let me show you how this plays out in real life. David was born in Sydney, went to school in Parramatta, started his career at Westpac in his early 20s. When he was 42, his company offered him a senior role in their Singapore office. 3-year contract, great money, too good to refuse. 3 years turned into 7. Still an Aussie citizen, still owned property in Australia, still paid Australian taxes on his rental income. At 58, he returned to Sydney. Worked another 9 years before retiring at 67. Total time living in Australia, more than 50 years. When David applied for the age pension, Services Australia asked for his complete residency history. They identified that 7-year gap when he was in Singapore. Before that posting, David's longest continuous period in Australia was from birth to age 42. After returning, he'd only been back for 9 years. Neither period met the 5-year continuous threshold required after age 16. His application was rejected. David appealed. The process took 14 months. During that time, he received nothing. He was living off savings he'd planned to use for other things. Eventually, with proper documentation and the help of a specialist advisor, his case was resolved. But by that point, he'd lost over $32,000 in pension payments, all because of a rule he'd never heard of. Here's an even more common scenario, and this one catches people completely off guard. Linda and John, both Australian citizens their entire lives, retired at 65. They'd always dreamed of doing a big European trip, so they sold their house in Brisbane, bought a motorhome, and spent 2 years travelling through Europe and the UK. Proper retirement adventure, right? Living the dream. When they returned to Australia and settled on the Gold Coast, Linda applied for the age pension at 67. Services Australia looked at her residency history. That 2-year absence from Australia broke her continuity of residence. Before the trip, her last continuous period was from age 18 to 65. That qualified. But then she left for 2 years. When she returned and applied, Services Australia assessed her application based on a fresh residency period starting from when she returned. She hadn't been back for 5 continuous years yet. Application placed on hold. This is where it gets even more frustrating. Linda eventually qualified, but her payment start date was calculated from when she met the 5-year continuous requirement, not from when she first applied. She lost 3 years of payments. That's roughly $44,000, all because they took an extended holiday. You might be thinking, well, I've never worked overseas and I'm not planning any long trips, so I'm safe. Not so fast. Let me tell you exactly who's falling into this trap because it's a much bigger group than you'd think. First, the skilled migrant. You came to Australia in your 30s or 40s. You've worked here, paid taxes here, built a life here, but if you've taken extended trips back to your country of origin to care for aging parents, or if you spent time overseas before becoming a permanent resident, your continuous periods might not add up the way you think they do. Second, the FIFO and corporate workers. If you've worked in mining, oil and gas, international finance, or for multinational corporations, there's a very good chance you've spent time on overseas postings. Even if your employer was Australian, if you were physically overseas for more than 12 months, that's in your residency record. Third, the retiree who went home first. This is increasingly common. People retire, spend a few years living in Thailand, Bali, Portugal, or another lower-cost country, then return to Australia when they need healthcare or want to be near family. That overseas period can disqualify them entirely. Fourth, the dual citizen commuter. If you hold dual citizenship and you've split your time between Australia and another country, even if you've been an Australian citizen for decades, the physical presence test can be brutal. Fifth, the travelling retiree. Spent 18 months on a cruise, bought a place in Italy for a few years. Even if you maintained your Australian residency for tax purposes, Services Australia applies a different test. And here's the stat that should wake everyone up. According to data from the Department of Social Services in the 2022 to 23 financial year alone, over 14,300 age pension applications were rejected or delayed specifically due to residency requirement issues. That's not a small number. That's a systemic problem. When you lodge your age pension application, you'll be asked to complete a residency declaration. You'll need to list every period you've lived outside Australia since the age of 16. Services Australia then cross-references this with your passport records, immigration movement records, tax file information, and Centrelink payment history. If there are gaps, inconsistencies, or periods that break continuity, your application gets flagged. Here's where people get caught out. They genuinely forget about periods they spent overseas. A 6-month work stint in New Zealand 20 years ago. A year in London in their 20s. But Services Australia doesn't forget. It's all in the system. And if your declaration doesn't match their records, your application can be rejected for providing false or misleading information, even if it was an honest mistake. Now, here's something that can actually help you, but only if you know about it. Australia has social security agreements with 31 countries, including New Zealand, the UK, the United States, Canada, Italy, Greece, and many others. If you've lived or worked in one of these countries, the time you spent there may count toward your Australian residency requirements under the agreement. This is huge. This can be the difference between qualifying and not qualifying, but here's the catch. These agreements are not applied automatically. You must know the agreement exists, specifically request that it be applied, and provide documentation from the other country proving your residency and work history there. If you don't know to ask for it, Services Australia won't necessarily tell you it's an option. I'll say that again because it's critical. If you don't ask, they often won't tell you. And getting the documentation from another country's social security system can take months, especially if you're dealing with countries like Italy, Greece, or Spain, where bureaucracy moves at a glacial pace. Let's talk about the real-world consequences, because this isn't just an administrative inconvenience. In the first scenario, your application is put on hold while Services Australia requests additional documentation. This can take anywhere from 3 to 18 months. During this time, you receive no pension payments. If you were counting on that income, you're now drawing down savings, relying on super, or depending on family. In the second scenario, under some international agreements, your pension is calculated proportionally based on how many years you've lived in each country. Instead of the full age pension, currently $1,064 per fortnight for a single person, you might receive 60% or 70% of that amount. For some people, that reduction is manageable. For others, it's devastating. In the third scenario, your application is rejected outright. You can appeal, but the administrative review tribunal process takes time, requires evidence, and often requires professional representation. The success rate for appeals varies, but without proper documentation, your chances aren't great. And here's the financial reality. If you're rejected and it takes 12 months to resolve, that's $27,664 in lost pension payments for a single person. 2 years, over $55,000. That's not nothing. For most retirees, that's life-changing money. All right, enough problems. Let's talk solutions. If you're within 5 years of pension age, or if you're already eligible and haven't applied yet, here's exactly what you need to do. First, audit your residency history today. Sit down with a calendar and your passport. Go back to age 16. List every period you've spent outside Australia. Include the dates, the country, and the reason. Be thorough. This is not the time to rely on memory. Second, calculate your continuous periods. Look at your timeline. Identify your longest continuous period of Australian residence. Is it more than 5 years? If yes, you're likely okay. If no, or if it's close, you need professional advice immediately. Third, check for international agreements. Go to the Services Australia website and search for international social security agreements. See if any of the countries you've lived in are listed. If they are, start gathering documentation from that country now, not when you apply. Fourth, get your documentation in order. You'll need evidence of your residency. This includes certified copies of all passports, current and expired, employment records showing where you worked and when, tax returns, tenancy agreements or property records, and any Centrelink or Medicare records. Fifth, get specialist advice. And I'm not talking about your local financial planner who does super and investments. You need someone who specializes in age pension entitlements and residency requirements. The cost of this advice is typically between $500 and $2,000. Compare that to the $27,000 plus you could lose in the first year alone if your application is rejected. Before we wrap up, I need to address the single biggest misconception that's causing people to lose their age pension entitlements. Being an Australian citizen does not automatically entitle you to the age pension. Read that again. Citizenship and residency are two completely different legal concepts under the Social Security Act. You can be a citizen and still fail the residency test. You can have an Australian passport, vote in Australian elections, have been born here, and still be disqualified. The age pension is based on physical presence in Australia, not on your citizenship status. This distinction is poorly understood, rarely explained, and it's catching people out every single day. The age pension residency rules are complex, poorly communicated, and genuinely unfair to many people who've contributed to this country their entire lives. But they're not going away. And ignorance of these rules won't protect you when you're sitting across from a Services Australia officer being told your application has been rejected. The good news is that with the right preparation, with the right documentation, and with the right advice, most people can navigate these requirements successfully. But you have to know what you're dealing with. If this video has raised questions about your situation, don't ignore them. Don't assume it'll be fine. Don't wait until you're 67 and lodging your application to find out you've got a problem. Check your residency history this week. Share this video with anyone you know approaching retirement. Leave a comment below if you've experienced this issue yourself, because your story might help someone else avoid the same trap. And if you haven't subscribed to Pension Clarity Australia yet, hit that button now. We publish clear, no-nonsense breakdowns of the Australian retirement system every week, because this stuff is too important to get wrong. This is Pension Clarity Australia. We'll see you in the next one.